Welcome, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. We are so excited to be partnering with Sales Enablement Collective for this virtual event, building a high-impact pre-sales enablement program. A few things just to remind you of today. Please use that chat to connect with each other, engage with each other. But if you have questions, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We'll have some time for Q&A at the end. Also, as Jack mentioned, change your chat feed function from host and panelist to everyone so that we can all see what you're chatting about. On that note, please join me in welcoming our panel today. We have our host, Jack Cochran, General Manager of Presales Collective, Katie Sedgwick, Director of Solutions at Oracle, of Service Solutions at Oracle, Matt Hill, Senior Director of Revenue Enablement at ClearData, Stuart Bierig, Vice President of Presales at Global Sales Enablement at Penaya, and Wendy McHenry, who most recently was Head of Solutions Engineering at CData. Thank you all for being here. It's going to be a wonderful panel today, and I will toss it over to you, Jack.
Thank you, Courtney. Thanks everyone for being here. I'm really excited for this panel. We're doing this in partnership with the Sales Enablement Collective, and really excited to hop into our topic today on kind of building that technical enablement program, a high impact pre-sales enablement program is I think how we've titled it. And to kick things off, the first question that I want to ask everybody is to hear a little bit about kind of your hot take on enablement. So talk to us a little bit about the most transformative sales enablement program or experiences that you've built, and specifically what made it so impactful. Katie, I'd like to start with you if you don't mind.
Yeah, thanks, Jack. All right, so it's a very top of mind area for me because we just kicked off an enablement this week with my team that I'm really excited about. So at Oracle, it's Q4, it's super busy, so we have to be really concise with what we're delivering. But we are doing a series that we are calling Ignite to Execute, where every Monday we are sending out a 5-minute or less video highlighting a key pre-sales skill, something like how do you introduce yourself effectively on the call was a topic this week. Then we practice and apply it this week. And then on Fridays, we have a session where we get together as a team and we kind of do an in the barrel. Jack, let's hear your intro and, try it out with our team in a safe space to learn and share about how it changed our customer conversations.
Great, I love it. Matt, same question to you. What's kind of your hot take on the most transformative enablement program?
Yeah, great question. So I'm actually a former systems engineer, and how I got into enablement was I got tapped on the shoulder and said, "Hey, come help us." So I think of it first and foremost from a technical seller perspective. So I think for me, probably the most impactful thing I can think of is redefining what the role is of pre-sales in the sales process, migrating from just being the demo person into somebody that's actually driving the sale, and where's the engagement of that team and that individual into ensuring we not only achieve technical closure but also business closure as well.
Love it. Great. Wendy, over to you. Same question.
So for me, I think a very common thread among pre-sales teams is the challenge of knowledge sharing. How do you capture the knowledge in your SE's heads? How do you share that across the team? How do you scale that? So what I'm most proud of is the knowledge management function that we launched at Pega. I led that initiative. It offered us a single source of truth for everything collaboration and knowledge sharing. So the key was collaboration communication. How are we sharing that not only across pre-sales, but across all of go-to-market? And at Pega, it was especially complex because we had multiple SE specializations, a very complex product portfolio. And at the end of the day, when we had all of that built out, and it was a huge effort, it helped both SEs and AEs prepare for client meetings, answer questions, handle objections. And another added benefit was to help with onboarding new SEs as well and reduce that time to launch a new SE into the field.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's great. I think that's something that we tend to forget about is the knowledge part of the enablement side of it. Stuart, over to you. Your hot take on a transformative enablement program.
So hi, everyone. Thanks for being here today. Like Matt, I come from a pre-sales background, and about 3 years ago, I got the same tap that he got doing sales enablement and also field customer success pre-sales enablement as well. And I still manage my AMR pre-sales team. But I think one of the more transformative initiatives that I've been involved with was before I got involved with enablement, new product introductions at Penang. We're a relatively small company, kind of like a tiny bit of what Oracle does. We're a $50 million a year company. spread out across the globe. And we used to do new product introductions during QBRs or SKO for that matter. And it was just a series of presentations, maybe demos, and they weren't recorded really well. They weren't very atomic in nature. And about 2 years ago, we rolled out with a very powerful test automation platform. And I said, no, let's not do it this way. Let's build very atomic 30-minute sessions woven between product management, R&D, sales, pre-sales, et cetera. Every piece of content was shared. We have a KM technology that we're using where the entire event is there. And then if we ever needed to repurpose it 6 months or a year down the road, maybe we could swap out. Like, let's say a pre-sales person now can handle something that product management did now that we're familiar with the technology. So it's reusable, it's repurposable, it gets added into both pre-sales, customer success, and sales onboarding for that technology. And it's just overall much more practical approach.
Yeah, the key there, I definitely agree that the reusable and re-enableable, I suppose, is what it becomes, because as we all know, you can't just learn something once. You have to learn it how many times? 3, 4 times before it finally sticks in most cases. So I love that. Thank you everyone for kind of giving that perspective. Matt, I love kind of hear a little bit more about your kind of background, being software engineer into your role that you do now, specifically as you've thought about using that for creating or building a technical sales enablement program.
Mhm.
Your perspective on sort of what are the critical pieces to building that technical enablement program?
Yeah, I would say that there's probably a dozen different things I look at. Obviously, you look at things like, why are we doing it? What are the business and revenue goals of the organization? But you also need to understand a deeper understanding of the technical buyer and the use cases. What are they chiefly tasked with understanding, and why? And then be able to customize enablement based upon role, right? So if you are a different type of SE or a solution architect, you have a different type of responsibility. So being able to customize that, but also looking at, it's not just platform and product enablement. It's all about, sales plays, the messaging, the tools, your readiness in front of a customer, also your ability to present, and what is your your not just your technical ability, but your ability to make a compelling business case in front of a technical audience.
Yeah, I think that's the technical business case being very critical to that. Stuart, over to you. I'd love to hear kind of your perspective adding on to that. I know you had something to add for this question.
It's I look, I work for a relatively small company, so our budget is kind of tight. So what we try to do is, first of all, we try to optimize as much as possible. I come from a Six Sigma background, so optimization is always on my mind. I can make jokes about anniversary cards with my wife, but let's not go there. But the bottom line is what I try to do, again, I guess, repurpose as much as possible. So what we try to do first and foremost is that anything we do for sales enablement is also practical for pre-sales, customer support enablement. And so what we'll do is we'll leverage that day for everybody, and then the sales guys have their key messaging, their value prop, their competitive differentiation, et cetera. And then we go on and we just add on to that a lot. The second thing is I think it's very important to have a mix of recordings, of content, not just share the content, but review the content, and then have follow-up exercises with everybody, whether it's a certification on the sales side, which they hate doing. The pre-sales people kind of roll their eyes, but they'll just do it because they have to learn how to do the demo anyway. But just getting people, get the muscle memory of the value prop out. It's one thing to, learn how to drive on a PlayStation, right? But getting behind a car and actually doing it is very different. And the one last thing, and I'm sorry, this might be too long, but they say in quantum physics, light behaves differently when it's being observed and when it's not. And it's the same thing with demos, with pre-sales. Pre-sales people, when their managers are doing a certification, they'll handle it very differently. So a lot of times it's just let them go. Even salespeople, so like the first few intro calls are a little rusty, but instead of having one, let's monitor it after the fact, and then give them the constructive criticism, let them learn from their mistakes. I find that goes a lot better than trying to micromanage the perfect pitch before they actually go out and try in a real situation.
Yeah, those are key points, and I resonated really well with feeling like I haven't had the benefits of some of those pieces. I remember very distinctly coming out of an SKO and being told, okay, now you've learned everything you need to know. Now go demo a product. If that's you, anyone else in the chat here, put a 1 in the chat if that's been you. You've received something at SKO, and then that's all you ever receive. So we're definitely trying to get away from that. Absolutely love it.
The one thing
Kate,
I would add, the one thing I would add real quick is make sure you understand what the metrics are, and how you're going to measure what the impact of that program was.
Mhm.
That's critically important.
Yeah, absolutely love it. Katie, I know you had some contributions here on this topic as well.
Yeah, I think, and it tags actually into a question that we have in the chat around kind of how do we balance the in-person and the technical product skills versus the soft skills. And, I think it's really looking at what's your goals of what you want to be accomplishing in your enablement, and really trying to maximize any of that in-person time, whether it's on a webinar or actually in person in a room. That's, kind of become a rarity here. Video is a great way to do that, of, giving that pre-work of what we can be doing, what's the short micro learnings I'm a big believer in, and then, maximizing that in-person time of, are we doing a practice call where we're getting all in the barrel together and just trying it out and seeing how it goes before we get, kicked to the customers to deliver it. So kind of weigh both of those sides as you're thinking about building it.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. It's that fine balance sort of between almost also taking the technical depth as well, along with the overall sales methodology training as well. Like there's a balance also between not only understanding it, but then knowing how to apply that to the sales best practices. And Kate, I know, just to continuing with you here, I know you've had some experience in kind of figuring out how to balance some of those two. What's kind of your tips on how to take something you've been trained and then enable your teams to go to market with it?
Mm-hmm. So a couple things. First, look at it as a partnership. And it's a great way for us to further build that relationship with sales and go-to-market teams as we're developing enablement. I would also say, as you are developing it, don't just record the 1-hour session that maybe you did as a webinar introducing our new pitch book or whatever that is, but really think about any of the recordings you give of being what's digestible and meaningful from this, which is probably going to be a different recording that you're sharing versus just a repeat of, do you really ever watch when they launch, here's the recording from our all hands call? You probably don't. But if it's a much more meaningful, concise version of it, it's much more digestible, because I'm a big believer, and I stole this line from someone great that I worked with, but salespeople are opportunity specific, just-in-time learners. So, as we're looking at this, how can we make sure that we're providing the right content and the right points in a process of sales experience, and that when they need that answer, it's very quick and easy to find, which ties a lot into what Wendy was talking about really thinking about your content management strategy with what you're doing for enablement.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely right. That's a theme I'm hearing in a few answers here, is that making that content more reusable. Specifically, I guess, on that note, what have been the best, I guess, delivery methods that each of you have found for different types of content, different types of training? We've heard about, the SKOs, you've heard about, we obviously think about the individual training times we have, or maybe times with product. Wendy, I'd love to hear from you specifically on this, as you brought up the content management stuff before. How do you make sure you've got all of the different training and learning styles covered?
Sure. So we have been alluding to that, right? Like, first of all, different people learn different ways, but one thing I learned, and I kind of learned it by fire when I was in the field effectiveness role, is repetition. It's not just I do an enablement session and I'm done. That is absolutely not the case at all, at least not in my experience at all. So one thing I learned from my CSM when I was working with Gong was they do enablement themes. And so we played with doing a theme for a month or theme for a quarter, right? And so it's going to be a mix of things. Also, I look at the psychology of how people learn, right? And how they retain information. And like 10% of it would be through something you've read, but like the majority of what you are going to retain is when you've actually done it. So we've all talked about that, the experiential learning, right? So of course, hands-on workshop is ideal, right? That's for, at least for an SE, right? That's the ideal, but like I feel like that's gotten more complicated post-pandemic. We're very dispersed, and we've always been that way as an SE, right? So I have played around with a lot of different delivery methods. So something that I started doing as a leader is flying my team in person once a quarter and have an enablement component while we were together. And then we would have a follow-up plan from there. So it might be we're doing coaching with your manager, right? One-on-one coaching, again, practicing it before we're in the field, maybe some shadowing, but definitely looking at call recordings and practicing it. But something else we did recently was my managers went through like a demo script for one of our core products, and they went through and we took value messages for each of our products out there, features of the product, so that then the SEs could have something to start with to practice from there. It's tricky, I think, and because to me, it's all about how do you ensure it's sticky and being used.
You know, I'd love to chime in here because I think when you talked about that content to support it, it's a really important modality for hitting the different learning styles. So maybe we had a webinar, maybe there's a certification that you're recording, practicing it with your peers. A cheat sheet is a great supporter as well. You know, keep it to being like a one pager. You know, what's the value? You know, maybe it's an example. We did an executive conversation starter where you kind of move left to right across. Here's the audience. Here's what they care about. Here's, you know, a customer proof point to share. Here's a question to ask. And being very practical in the tools that you use to support your enablement to be a way to reinforce that learning and being something that actually isn't just a nice session that we had and everybody felt good about connecting, but something that gets put into action.
Love it. Matt, I want to make sure I can toss this to you as well. I know you've got some personal kind of experience or background in your career around kind of building this ongoing programs as well. I'd love to have you chime in here as well.
Yeah, everything that everybody said here is spot on. You know, the live scenario-based workshops, you know, SEs like to do certifications, obviously love to do labs. I tend to look at it from the perspective of you know, how are we demoing to specific use cases and to drive the outcomes that we want. But, you know, I think most importantly, and this is actually how I ended up getting called into what we now call enablement, is SEs love to hear from other SEs. What's been successful? How did they tackle something? How did they position a message? They like to hear from successful counterparts.
Yeah. Oh yeah, teams teaching each other, right? But there has to be a setup. There has to be an agreement that that's something that is acceptable to do within teams as well. Stuart, I'm going to pull you out of the comments. Talk to you a little bit more about this. It took you 2 years to convince your
Executive leadership. Yeah.
I'm not sure. I know ELT from a data perspective, but
executive leadership. I think that's ETL, but doesn't matter.
Yeah.
That's
yeah, but so talking more about that, like what did it take to get that buy-in, and how did you actually go about getting that buy-in when they said yes?
Well, I've been in pre-sales for over 2 decades, and I remember my first job was at a company called Web Methods, which was acquired by Software AG. I think they sold it off recently to IBM. Anyone still there? Hello. But the chief product officer at Web Methods insisted on having a half a day exclusive for her and the product managers under her to talk about strategic vision, long-term roadmap, and then open it up for specific questions. She asked questions and gave at least an hour where the field could ask questions about, you know, feature requests, you know, gaps, bugs that have not been resolved, etc. And it was an extremely valuable session to the point where I noticed and I was there for about 7 years, but I noticed that some of the best salespeople used to cut out of whatever sessions they had and sit in the back for those 4 hours, because those were the salespeople who really wanted to understand the product. And also talking a vision and a journey in a sales call can be very valuable, selling the future direction of a product. And when I joined Panaya, they didn't really have that at all. So, we in the beginning for a time, we were able to get a couple of hours here and there, but we were finally just pushing for just a day. We also were able to combine like product QBR. So a product QBR is something we try to do every 6 months with leadership, pre-sales leadership, customer success, and product to talk about this. But to have that day where we could do a little bit of product QBR and tips and tricks, like Matt said, have some of your best people demo. This is the way, our demos always look beautiful. That no one realizes sometimes you're dancing through a minefield, but it's just, it runs perfectly if you do it right. So, best practices, best guidelines, etc., that we do share from time to time. But again, seeing it live and people raising, why did you do this, not that? That collaborative experience is worthwhile. It was worth the cost of basically another night at the hotel and 2 more meals, especially because now we have global impact, not just our weekly or monthly team or regional meetings.
Yeah, that's just great. I'd love to open this up to the rest of the group as well, about just sort of the process around getting buy-in, for whether it's the extra day at SKO, or even just we want to run this program. We want to take an hour of someone's time, even virtually, on a regular basis in order to train them effectively and continually, enable people. What's the process people have used? What have been the best practices people have seen in actually getting buy-in for those programs? Open it up to anyone from the panel, as this is sort of an unscripted question we didn't prepare for.
Yeah.
I will say, oh, go ahead, Matt.
I was going to say, I'm fortunate. I've always worked for organizations that have led from a technical perspective. I started my career in semantic cybersecurity. Obviously, technical sellers are critically important. But as you think about those things, and I think about how the SCO is transformed, or any sort of event has transformed, we've gone from literally hauling in hardware into a room and doing demos and setting up sandboxes and stuff like that, into really transforming into how you make the technical sale. And as you start to, and it's a question around how do you measure success? What I look at are the metrics are, how do we now start to inform things like deal velocity, or time to close, or close conversion rates, stuff like that. As you start to see what that impact is, those conversations become much, much easier with executive buy-in stakeholders, or getting executive buy-in from those stakeholders. Just makes those conversations much easier.
So what I was going to share as a best practice is branded. So don't just say, I want to do product training, or I want to do some soft skills training, but build a brand around it, because that creates some excitement. So like I said, the program we just launched, it's called Ignite to Execute. It explains what it does. It's an Ignite video. We end with execution and practice. We did one where it was about competitive intelligence and wanting to really foster that peer learning. And we did it in the format like The View. We had a roundtable of people who had worked for competitors coming and sharing their experience. What's it like on the other side, in that SC to SC kind of sharing mode. We called it the competitive view. We made a whole brand about it, and really kind of tried to mock what that experience was. We did one like The Voice, and we wore wigs and we tried to impersonate the chairs with it when we were kind of doing the in the barrel practice. Like, have some fun, some creativity, but building that brand with it just helps spark the momentum and really makes it something, versus just this random pitch or ask that you have.
So I'll share, Jack, just quickly. My experience at Pega happened when the pandemic started, and all of a sudden we couldn't be in front of our clients. And having previously led an inside sales motion, I was doing a lot of coaching of both SEs and AEs. And then from that, they could see the impact of that work, and they actually created the field effectiveness role for pre-sales for me. And that's how that started. So I saw a question in the Q&A about that. That was one way that we knew it was time to have someone focused on pre-sales enablement, but we can come back to that later too.
Yeah, we'll definitely, would love to explore that more, definitely in the Q&A, which, by the way, as a reminder to everyone, if you have a question you want to ask in the Q&A, which should be coming up in about 20 minutes here, please do throw that into the question and answer box that you see at the bottom of the webinar there. I had a thought around sort of this, we're we're getting buy-in, we're standing these things up, we've seen the value of it. How do we measure the effectiveness of this? Because that's going to be a question that comes up as we're going out building these programs. How do you know that they're actually being worthwhile? Matt, would love to hear from you first on this, and then to the rest of the group. How do you measure, and what are the critical pieces you need to measure in order to prove that this is something worth doing? I think you got put on mute, Matt.
There we go. Yeah, I touched on this a little bit on the last question. There's always those immediate reaction stats, attendance, certifications, stuff like that. But those are boring. What I really care about are again, the win rates, demo to close rates, deal velocity. If you're a new person or we're ramping you, what is your time to productivity and role? The real measurable business metrics as opposed to the traditional attendance certification metrics.
Yeah. You also want to hop in on key things you've measured in addition to that?
Well, I think that a lot of the metrics that are used for sales, I'm not 100% sure that they're applicable to pre-sales. So for sales enablement, I think a lot of those metrics, at the end of the day, the way I look at it, and again, I'm lucky if I'm right 50% of the time. I think for pre-sales, one, it's skill set, and the skill set can be measured very easily by management and the account execs that are aligned with those pre-sales engineers. Trust me, if there's a pre-sales person who's not doing a good job, we know about it. But so it's skill set and ultimately ACV. How much money you're bringing in at the end of the day. If there are people on my team who have very different styles, and I'm not going to force them to fit a certain way if they're successful. If the customers are they like them, it's resonating, they trust them, and we're moving things forward. But I find that a lot of the sales metrics sometimes are skewed by sales related factors that are completely out of control of pre-sales. So sometimes pricing, because you could have two deals in two different regions, same exact products, but one is taking a very different strategy for pricing than the other because of how the region is doing and how close they are hitting their number, or how desperate the manager is, etc. So I personally don't like pre-sales being a slave to what I'll call sales management strategies. But at the end of the day, obviously if a person's not closing deals, or it's taking a long time to get out of a POC cycle or something of that nature, that is an area of concern. But when it comes to pure sales metrics, I try to stay a little bit away from them as much as I can.
Well, I think know where your baseline is, where you're starting. So is it product training for maybe a new module that you have? What's our pipeline look like before and after the learning? If it is improving how we are preparing, with some soft skills around how we're preparing and delivering our customer messaging, what's our prep time before versus after? Are we decreasing our prep time? Where are there metrics that you can control, being a big part of how you're thinking about how you're going to measure this, to piggyback on what Stuart was talking about, because there's a lot of things we can't control that aren't kind of good data or consistent data. But make sure you've got that baseline so you can speak to where that change was, to help build that momentum for future learning. Excellent.
Yeah, all great ideas. I think, and great points. I think it's so critical to keep a pulse on that. And I love Stuart. I love the approach as well of you're very right. We all know that if an SE is not performing up to standard, we're going to know about it, right? But a big part of it is how can we also measure that so that we're not getting the alarms being read, but we're noticing that through our program that, hey, there's extra work that needs to be done there. Which brings me to another point, and this kind of gets back a little bit to the whole we've done. So if we've set up the program, we've done a good job of getting the content into place that can be revisited, reviewed, etc. But we all know that take even the product aside, how we train someone today on good best practices, that might need revision over time. So how do you keep it fresh? How do you make sure not only is it accurate to the current direction of the company from a sales process perspective, but even from a skills perspective, making sure that we're staying consistent with that. Katie, I'd like to start with you on this. What have you been able to implement or do in order to help ensure that programs stay fresh and relevant over time?
I think a lot of it is embrace creativity and really kind of embracing how can we do this in a different way? What have we done before? What worked? Let's do more of that. Or what have we not tried that could be fun to do? Another great thing to do is really look at what you're doing with this as a development opportunity. So if you're a leader, maybe there's somebody who's eager to step into a different role or really wants to learn more about product or be a part of our sales plays development process or something like that. See if there's a way for them to be a part of the enablement that you're building and developing. As Wendy called out, we love to learn from our peers in pre-sales, and that can be a great way to not only foster that peer learning, but to provide development for our team members as they're wanting to take on and grow their careers more and be a new voice to hear.
So
I'm the least creative person in the world, to be honest. And I love the idea of branding, but it's like, I just can't. So it's just funny. But I find at the end of the day, a pre-sales engineer, if there's a custom demo that they have to build or prepare for, that could potentially lead to a large deal, or there's this enablement training initiative that we need them to complete, which one are they going to choose? And a lot of times those things just fall on the wayside. So what we try to do, at least what I try to do, is we have an MBO component to our variable compensation, and at least half the MBO every quarter is focused on new skill acquisition or new feature demo capability. Build, a 10-minute recording that shows these new features and our new instructions in our, let's say, test automation tool. Things that I may not do in a demo because 99% of my one-on-one demos will never include them, but I need people to learn them and become proficient if it needs to show up in a demo. So I usually basically pay them / bribe them to learn those skills. I think it's constructive, unfortunately.
Yeah, Wendy, I saw you nodding your head to the NBOs. Is this something you've done as well?
I've done that as when I joined CData, I was literally building the pre-sales function, and my initial team all came from technical support, and none of them were trained as SEs before. And so I had to build the enablement program, and we had a significant MBO component, right, for their learning. And it was extremely effective because absolutely, it is very easy as SEs and as salespeople to get caught up in the day-to-day of the opportunities and just keep that running forward and just keep it going. And I have found the biggest challenge I hear over and over again is, how do I find the time to learn new skills? So when we are the leaders guiding the enablement programs, we've got to ensure they're motivated, encouraged, supported to do that training. Right? Because it's important. It's important for them, because otherwise we're going to fall behind. And for me, having a brand new team, I had to start somewhere. And so the MBOs were because a lot of that was behavior change, cultural change. And MBOs, when you're in that position, MBOs, I think, are highly effective.
Definitely great. And we had, I think my favorite thing about MBOs happen in the chat right now. Someone asked the definition of that, and we got 3 different definitions of MBO. But from a high level perspective, think of this as something that is added on to usually your compensation that's not a metric base that you can say it's revenue, but it's some other metric or thing you're trying to, not metric, but thing you're trying to achieve that you can't tie direct metric to, that adds into your compensation. So yeah, manager-based objective, measurement, business objectives, management by objective. That's the thought, that's the idea behind it, but I absolutely love it. Matt, would love to hear from you as well on this topic. If you have anything to add around sort of how you've helped to kind of keep programs fresh and over time with what you built.
Yeah, all great comments so far. I especially like what Stu said around the process that he has in place. But I tend to think of it and look at it as, what are the other things outside of my purview that they should also be looking at? As an example, demo skills, maybe technical certifications within the field. Make sure you're making that part of the program. And then, at the end of the day, do you have somebody that's directly looking over the day-to-day things that a technical organization is trying to do, and is staying on top of how you certify, or maybe not certify them, but how you enable them, how do you prepare them for the conversations that you're having, and being able to pivot that along with any other sales or revenue team enablement objectives.
I absolutely love it. So the last thing before we get to the Q&A, so a reminder, if you do have any questions you want to answer, have us answer, please drop that into the Q&A section there at the bottom. We got a couple already, but love to see a few more. Final question I have for the group. So we've talked about now getting everything set up to be repeatable, getting buy-in, documenting it, measuring it, keeping things fresh and relevant. The last piece is, okay, let's say now we're at the point where the company's growing and this enablement program needs to grow. How do you make sure you're scaling technical enablement as the team grows? Wendy, you want to ask this of you first. What have you seen? What have you done as you've needed to scale things along with the growth of the company?
Sure. So, I mean, obviously, yes, I think scaling will obviously depend on where you're at and the maturity of your sales process, right? So when I started at that company where I was building out the pre-sales motion, all of our enablement was done live, it was recorded, and then it was shared out. My onboarding process was literally unique for each single SE that I hired. So it was different every single time. So for me, scaling there meant moving towards a standardized onboarding experience. And then starting to move into automation. So for example, I mentioned Gong earlier. I was a big fan of using Gong. I really liked their call insights. I found that analysis of sales calls would help me in my coaching. It was helping me understand where my SEs were at, what they would need for growth, right? And then were they leveraging the coaching that we had provided? We also were doing things like saving libraries of clips of effective demos or calls, or maybe if we're focused on objection handling, we were taking components of clips of calls and then putting that in a library, and whatever that topic of enablement might have been from there. But in terms of automation, if you have a much more mature enablement program, I think there's a lot of cool things being done out in enablement on automation that some of my enablement peers here could talk about too.
Excellent. Katie, Stuart, Matt?
Yeah, I'll chime in. A great way you can scale is to think about who else could you be working with on this. Partners could be a great way to help scale, to be multiplying what you're doing and also ensuring that there's consistency of what your internal organization and your partners are delivering from a go-to-market perspective. Wendy brings up a really good point about thinking about where are we delivering this and kind of thinking about that just-in-time opportunity specific. One of my favorite jobs was I worked for a sales enablement company before sales enablement was a thing. So we were selling a technology, but we were also selling how do you build a process around this. And a great thing that we would do would be thinking about playbooks that would actually fit into your CRM right within an opportunity. So I'm at this stage, this type of industry, let's serve up the right assets and support materials from a sales enablement perspective that are going to best help you meet what you need there, whether it's I'm at the discovery phase. Here's a discovery guide for healthcare industry. Here's a great customer story about that, to just be that specific and point in time of where you need it.
Excellent.
Yeah,
This has been a great conversation. Oh, yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I would say I've worked for organizations as small as 10 SEs to ones that had 600 or 700 SEs. And so scaling is definitely a challenge. So not only do you have to develop the teams and the tools and content, et cetera, to be able to scale for that, but my advice is to look at the same way you look at all other enablement, and that is look at managers first, right? Who go to your SE managers and enable them first and foremost, so that they have the knowledge and the resources to be able to enable their own teams. If you start from that perspective, it allows us to scale better, but also more importantly, allows consistency in how those things are rolled out in the field. In trains, there's a comment here in the chat around scaling from an individual contributor to a manager role. A lot of times they're not taught how to actually do that role. So our job as enablers is to help them through that transition, or give them the tools to be able to be effective leaders. And part of that is starting with the basics of how we go enable and scale our teams.
Excellent. This has been a great conversation so far, and we have had a lot of good questions coming in. So I want to make sure we give time to the Q&A. So again, if you have questions, please drop them into the Q&A box below. Going through kind of the first one that we had come in here, this is could be a hot take from different people. If you only had budget and time, let's add that in for one in-person session, would you pick focusing on skills enablement or product enablement? What would be kind of the focus for that? Anyone want to take this one?
I'll go first. I would, if I had one, I would choose skills enablement, like presentation skills, communication skills. Like, for example, I just said, I remember a teacher who on site, now I'm sensitized to it, but the bottom line is those are the things that you can't really pick up naturally or internally in a team. I see some of my guys, some of my new pre-sales engineers, their pitch will be an amalgamation of different best used terms from other more senior people. So they kind of build their own talk track, but there's some core fundamental skills that it's very hard to teach unless it comes from a real professional. So I would focus on that first.
Yeah, I would say. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
As I say, I agree. And I think I would also challenge you, is there a way you can integrate a little bit of both? So if you had to do the technical side, could you maybe be practicing storytelling with this, or be working on objection handling in how are we talking about this very complex topic, and find, or whiteboarding this type of topic to find a little way to mix them both together if you can.
Yeah, I love that answer. I was just going to add on to that, which is agree. It's skills. The pure product and platform training is I think the low hanging fruit, the easy stuff. It's more about the practical application. How do I take this into a conversation with a customer that actually is driving value, and not just a point in time activity. So if I could if I could set aside time as some sort of event, whether it's quarterly or it's a SCO or whatnot, 100% on soft skills, and how do I go apply that into those conversations with customers?
Love it. Yeah. Definitely soft skills the harder. And I agree, Matt. It does feel like sometimes that the product enablement seems like the low hanging fruit. That's something you can, toss off to someone else. But yeah, focusing on soft skills, I think that's great. Question I want to toss to here, one from Nicole that came in. What tips can you provide for creating enablement that is both in person and virtual? Our company is shifting to a hybrid work environment. And I fear my responsibilities will increase because I will need to design various ways to deliver enablement. And related to that question, do you have insight into the effectiveness of in-person versus virtual enablement?
I can start here and just share my perspective. So my last team was a global team, and I was not able to fly everyone in person. So we were doing hybrid pre-sales enablement because that was what I had to do. And so I would have people in the room and then people virtual at the same time. And so I was very intentional about how do I make sure I'm engaging the virtual attendees. That's really the key when you're in a hybrid environment. It is very not human nature, I think. I mean, we've all been in these hybrid meetings, right? Where the people in the room get priority. So you, as the one leading it, have to be very intentional about how you're including and engaging with the virtual attendees to make sure they're getting something out of it as well. And we've also talked about the variety of learning styles. So we had opportunities for people to practice live in that session, and then opportunities for them to do self-study and asynchronously work on it. And then again, it was then the continuation from there. So that for me, I always did the first one where we were hybrid like that, and then the rest of them would be everyone was virtual. I also have heard theories where they've said for best practices for this type of hybrid environment, if one person is virtual, everyone should be logged onto their laptop with a camera. So we've also done that, where we might have a unified room audio, but everyone is on camera like this. So it kind of levels that playing field.
Really great tool to use when you've got that virtual or that hybrid is group breakout rooms. The pre-sales collective, when you do webinars, it's maybe a 4-hour big topic we're doing. Those are really impactful to make sure you're pulling people in and kind of re-clicking that engagement point. So definitely suggest that as a great tool.
Right, agree.
On that note, there's actually go ahead, Stuart.
I was just going to say that all my team we're all remote home office employees, and it's if we can get together face to face once a quarter as a team, I consider it lucky that we don't do QBRs face to face every quarter, which I consider a shame, but it's not my money. So so we try to make use of face to face as much as possible, but 90% of our enablement is remote, and so finding the best way to get people to work together and incent them to get that work done is really the battle. But again, if you have good people, they're entrepreneurial, they're competitive, they want to win deals, so they're they're self-motivated to become masters of their craft. So if you have the right people, they're going to have a small team, so they're less outliers, but at the end of the day, usually they will be motivated no matter what medium you can provide for them.
Yeah. On the note of tooling that Katie, you started kind of mentioning, there was a question here. What tools do you recommend for knowledge sharing? Slack and Notion are the main tools we use, but recently ran into losing Slack history with new data retention policies at our company. So what are some good tools that people have used for the knowledge sharing that we've talked about a few times?
And start, I brought that up originally. So Confluence is the one I've used most recently, company-wide. But I just wanted to share your experience about Slack and data retention. Your experience is not unusual. I've heard that before, and I've had that happen to me. So what we actually did was we wrote a program to go out and we'd scrape what we weren't using Slack, something else, but we would scrape all that data and we would mark it as a question and then the associated answers to it. And we stored that somewhere else so that it was searchable, discoverable, right? So, and we could control the retention policy and then also control who had access to it. So we could make sure, all of pre-sales had it. So there are things you can do to help get around that problem with the history of Slack.
Yeah, and there's a lot of new enablement platforms actually have the ability to set up team-based areas for collaboration. So if you think about some of the rogue IT or other types of things that SEs typically create, a lot of times those go when that person leaves and goes to a different role. So what you want to do is have some sort of standard place like Confluence, as Wendy mentioned, where that stuff is kept, but also more importantly refreshed and curated. So if you're using an enablement platform that has got that capability, that becomes something that is easily integrated into whatever you're trying to do, whether it's some sort of enablement program or some sort of onboarding program or whatnot. But just making sure that there's agreed upon standard place that it goes to, and not 6 or a dozen different places that might exist.
I think for pre-sales, it matters a little less for the most part on what tool you use. And that's not a knock on the tools that are out there. They're all very good. But in my case, R&D and tech, we're using Confluence. And so we just created a space for pre-sales and customer success managers. And I like the flexibility that we give, that people can, add a row and add their own video if they want to. And the watchers get notified, and we could kind of self-curate the content, as Matt said. I think for sales enablement, that's very dangerous, but we have a completely different platform for that we're very happy with, Document 360. But for pre-sales, I think Document 360 is overkill.
So Jack, there's actually a really interesting question in the chat. Sam is a new solution manager and kind of looking at how can we keep things fresh with our teams when maybe people have been on that team for a long time and kind of into their shtick of it's almost like they hit play. So how can we keep infusing new skills and keeping it fresh? So I would say, maybe think of some fun challenges you could do on team calls. So, one of the enablement topics we're going to be doing with my team as a spoiler for them for next week is we're going to be talking about storytelling in our conversations and how can we integrate different types of stories. So we're kind of doing a quick review of, there's your customer testimonial, but there's the problem solution, there's the hero's journey, there's a metaphor or an analogy that you can be using. And we're going to give everybody the same story of here's kind of the proof points, but how do you tell that in picking one of those different formats? So the same story can be told 10 different ways. And using that as a fun challenge so we can all hear the different ways that we're doing it.
I'll just say, frankly, as a pre-sales leader, and I'll do a plug here for Pre-Sales Collective, I go on the Pre-Sales Collective Slack all the time. Whenever I have anything going on, it's the first place I look to see what are other people seeing, and it helps me stay on top of what's going on in the industry as a whole. And it helps me understand what are the things that could be helpful, what's new, what's going on. I come to sessions like this where I learn from other pre-sales professionals. Honestly, that's really helped me a ton in my career.
Love the plug. Love the shout out. Thank you, Eddie. Presalescollective.com/Slack. If you're not haven't joined yet, you can join today. I love this question from Rashida. As an individual contributor, what are the most impactful ways to support team enablement and drive ownership even without formal authority?
I'd go back to the comment I made earlier around frontline leadership, aligning with them on what their priorities are. You'll find a willing audience. You'll find people that are wanting to team up with you. They see what the challenges are, and you can drive that type of relationship to specific outcomes that they're looking for. So I'd start there.
I think that it sounded like this person doesn't have like a formal enablement structure, and they're looking to get, let's say, other people on their team to adopt better practices. But obviously, if you don't have the mandate, officially, no one has to listen to you. So I think the best way in that case, it obviously has to be informal, but if you could build in very good, let's say, post demo, post event debriefing, constructive criticism. And if I'm a pre-sales engineer, every so often a salesperson might say something that is totally off from a feature function perspective. You know, ideally you have to keep that poker face and survive that. But after the fact, you could say, listen, you said X. I just want to show you, let's go into the product. Let's understand what the capabilities are, what the strengths and weaknesses really are. Just use that not as a criticism moment, but as educational and enablement opportunity. But it's informal, it's unofficial, but you have to do it in a soft way if you don't have that kind of mandate, because otherwise people will just say you're very critical.
Best practice sharing, another great way to foster that, just reach out to people like, hey, I'd love to, pick your brain about how are you doing this, and then start to share those best practices. I will also say, oftentimes your leaders are looking for content for all hands and those types of things. So if you have ideas, share them. Say, hey, I'd love on our next all hands, could we do like an enablement spotlight and talk about this customer story? I think it'd be really impactful for everybody based on what I've been hearing are some of your priorities.
Yeah, I can tell you, I never turned down someone from my team going, hey, I'd love to champion this idea around like enablement for the team. I never turned down that help, never turned down those ideas. So definitely just taking the initiative. I love it. While I'm being cognizant of the time here, I want to make sure we kind of close on some key words of wisdom from the panel. So I'm going to go around to everyone. Would love to hear about sort of your closing advice to everyone on here who's both, again, could be from people from Sales Enablement Collective, could be here from the Pre-Sales Collective. What's your final words of wisdom around building a kind of world-class technical pre-sales enablement program? Stuart, we'll start with you.
Like life, there are many different truths out there. I don't think there's one perfect way to achieve this goal. I think that if you're starting small, you try to take advantage of the technologies and tools that are already in place. And then when you get a certain critical mass that you could show that it makes sense to make an investment into something else. I think that big bang don't work. Just, small wins. I think Katie's idea was brilliant just on the last answer, which is just try to, start small, organic, maybe you have a weekly team meeting. We could start introducing something. Maybe there's a monthly regional meeting. We could start introducing something, take that recording, put it in a place that's easy to find, but just slow. And as long as you're moving in the right direction, I think that eventually you'll get where you want to be, because then other people will realize the value and will start investing budget, maybe even resources to your goal. But I don't think there's like a specific path. You just got to just move and keep on moving in the right direction, no matter how slow it may be.
Love it. Definitely start small. Wendy, the closing words of wisdom from you.
So for me, I would say it's fostering a culture of both collaboration and lifelong learning. And then as a leader, displaying that in everything you do. So in technical sales, there's always something new to learn. And fostering a culture of lifelong learning will help drive that adaptability of your team, credibility of your team, and that continuous improvement empowers us to keep pace with evolving products and buyer needs. It's also not tolerating those people who've been doing the job for a long time and are like, I know what I'm doing. I don't need to know anything else. Foster that we're lifelong learners. It's just part of the culture of your organization.
Love it. Yeah, lifelong learning, very, very critical. Matt, same to you. Final words of wisdom.
Yeah, just to add on what Wendy was saying, it's all about less theoretical and more about the real world application. But also keep in mind, I want to prepare you for the next job, not just what you're doing right now. So whether it's working at the same company in a different role or working for the next company, how do I now prepare you to be able to have that be able to do that? And that applies to any role, but especially for technical sellers. So I'd like to keep that in mind.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's how you get engagement from the team right there. I want to prepare you for your next role. Everyone loves that. Excellent. And Katie, finally, words of wisdom from you.
Yeah, so people who are in sales and in pre-sales, you're likely there because you're a curious person and you enjoy those engagements and learning and growing and discovering something new. So lean into the curiosity. And then secondly, I'll just say, remember that training and enablement are different things. So an enablement program is not just delivering training, but it's really thinking about everything else that you're wrapping around that with how is this supporting our goals and what are kind of go-to-market initiatives? How are we having resources and assets to support along the way and practice? So just remember to have that distinction as you're really designing your programs.
Absolutely great distinction. Love it. And with that, I think we're almost at time. So I'm gonna hand it back over to Courtney to close us out and let us know anything that we need to do or anything we forgot. But Courtney, over to you.
Oh, great. What a wonderful panel discussion. That was so engaging. The chat was awesome. Thank you all for being here. We have webinars monthly, so stay tuned. We will be releasing our May calendar of events. So keep your eye on the Slack and an email for that. And everyone just have a wonderful day. Thank you, Jack, Stuart, Matt, Katie, and Wendy. This was just wonderful. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
See you next time.
Bye.
Bye all.